We all saw a few days ago the chaos that unfolded in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol building. A bunch of Trump supporters and whoever else was amongst them stormed into the Capitol and caused all kinds of mess. They were smashing up stuff, they were looting things, which I didn't expect because what exactly are you looting out of the Capitol building? Maybe Nancy Pelosi has a new stapler. I don't know. But these Trumpsters and other right-wingers were really going at it with police. Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund said they were actually attacking police with metal pipes and chemical irritants and other weapons. Now, I don't know exactly what the chemical irritants they were using, but to me that sounds ominous because when you say chemical irritant, I'm thinking it could be something mild or it could be something that causes serious damage. But the point is, chemical irritants were used as weapons to attack the police. Now, I pick no sides in this particular conflict. I have no dog in this fight. The police, as well as the Trump rioters, I have equal distaste for. And when it first started to jump off, my first thoughts were, let them battle it out amongst themselves. And for a split second, I was thinking, let them get up in the Capitol and go to work and redecorate the place, sort of paint the walls, if you catch my drift. But then I had a realization that there are a lot of innocent people who are just trying to work, who have nothing to do with this, and they don't deserve to be put in that carnage. So to even wish they'd be in the vicinity of that is unfair to them. But anyways, this whole thing happened because it was allowed to happen. They did not take the necessary precautions, and it is my conjecture, let me put on my tinfoil hat for a minute, but it's my conjecture that it was intentional. On the cops' part, I'm talking about. The police around the nation are pro-Trump. Doesn't matter if it's a blue state or a red state, the police are red. In Chicago, the president of the Fraternal Order of the Police, John Catanzara, was defending what went down in D.C. I would have thought as an officer he would be more sympathetic to other officers, but he really had the cape on for the Trump people. He was saying how it was only a handful amongst the protesters who invaded the Capitol, which is probably true, but that doesn't mean anything because in any protest, the people who do the most extreme acts are usually in the minority of the group. But this dude even went as far as to say that the people invading the Capitol weren't destroying things or looting, and they weren't violent. Well, tell that to Officer Brian Sicknick, who they killed with a fire extinguisher. And that certainly contradicts what the Capitol Police Chief said about the protesters beating the cops with metal pipes and throwing chemicals on them. And what's ironic, you can see a bunch of protesters waving the Blue Lives Matter flags, and I guarantee you any other time, they'd be solidly on the side of the cops. And despite the assault on the cops, there are still many cops who are firmly MAGA, and I believe they will put that above the law as well as any other ideologies they hold. I think many of them can't be trusted to uphold the law, and this is why I said there are no good guys here. The lackluster response from police, I think, is due to many of them low-key agreeing with the protesters, but they still got to do their job, so they're on the fence but not totally committed to stopping the carnage. And since many of these police unions and officers are pro-Trump, many of them also agree that their guy lost and they're upset about it. Now, I'm not pro-Trump, but I suspect there was a finesse with this election, to be honest. To me, it looked like chicanery. I find it hard to believe Biden got more votes than any other president in history. I don't know exactly how they would have pulled off such a finesse, but when dealing with people with extreme power, wealth, and influence, I don't know the limits of their reach, so I don't know what they're capable of pulling off. Now back to the cops. There are cops who are not only Trumpsters, but there are cops a part of all kinds of nefarious organizations and subversive groups. Way back in 2006, under the Bush administration, the Justice Department said law enforcement all over the country was thoroughly infiltrated by white supremacists. You'd be naive to think 15 years later this wasn't still a problem. And regarding the riot in DC, I'm curious to see what kinds of punishment they're going to be giving out to those involved. Now, the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee is calling on federal officials to add the people involved in the attack on the Capitol to a federal no-fly list. That makes sense because if someone is identified as a terrorist, you damn sure don't want them on airplanes. That's just the start, but what charges will they get, and will they be proportionate to what happened, or will they be slaps on the wrist? A police officer was killed. The police also found a couple of pipe bombs, and the whole attack was to stop the result of the election. If this happened somewhere in like China, Egypt, Nigeria, and many other countries, the place would have been a crimson river. I mean, who could forget an event like Rabaa Square massacre a few years ago when the Egyptian military killed 1,000 people protesting? These dudes are lucky we're in the United States. I'm not saying it can't happen here, but it would be a big problem if it did. So, what charges will be brought? given everything that happened, I'd assume they'd be serious charges like terrorism or sedition. I mean, I don't know how you won't charge them with something like sedition when this looked very much like a coup attempt. But it wouldn't surprise me one bit if the charges are weak given the lackluster response and preparation for this event. They'd probably have lackluster punishment for the culprits. And I guess the police didn't seem prepared because they didn't expect this to happen, or so they say. The DC police chief said they didn't expect them to enter the Capitol building, but there were far-right groups discussing online how they would in fact enter the Capitol building. Maybe the cops thought they were bluffing. And Trump's energy was very different this week as opposed to the ongoing protests in the summer of 2020. July 27th, 2020, he said, "Anarchists, agitators, or protesters who vandalize or damage our federal courthouse in Portland or any federal buildings in any of our cities or states will be prosecuted under our recently reenacted Statutes and Monuments Act. Minimum 10 years in prison." And he tagged the Department of Homeland Security. So Trump was very bold and very clear. He wanted punishment, keyword punishment, for, as he says, anarchists, agitators, and protesters who vandalize federal buildings. He was saying they'll get a minimum of a decade behind bars. So his attitude towards this kind of thing is zero tolerance, right? Well, this is what he tweeted as it was going on this week. "I am asking everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful, no violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order. Respect our law and our great men and women in blue. Thank you." Way toned down response, no threats, no tough talk, very measured, pleading with them not to be violent, but not saying what the repercussions will be if they are. The responses are like night and day, and I think Trump low-key enjoys that people are so devoted to him. They were really turning up for him, and in the case of Ashley Babbitt, literally dying for him. And part of the reason they were able to turn up so much was the mayor of DC couldn't get the National Guard there fast enough to help quell the riot. She asked for National Guard backup, but it was delayed because the Defense Department refused her at first. Eventually, they relented and sent in the guard, but people are saying it could have been sooner. And this is also one of the reasons why she was saying DC should become a state, because the governor of a state has the power to summon the National Guard, whereas a mayor can't do that. And any mayor of DC would have to get permission for the National Guard to come there. Now, last year, some legislation was approved by the House to make DC a state, but it didn't get the GOP votes it needed. And Senator Chuck Schumer said he'll make that a priority to expand voting rights because residents of DC don't exactly have the voting rights of people living in states. And this is a little off topic, but I was thinking, how would you put 51 stars on the flag if you decide to make DC the 51st state? And does DC need to be a state, or should they modify certain rules to give it a similitude of state sovereignty without it actually being a state, like granting the DC mayor the power to summon the National Guard, but only for the mayor of DC and not other mayors, since that's a unique situation. I don't know how they'll work that out, but anyways, what transpired was not a small thing. It's dangerous, and it looks like it could set up something far worse in the future. In my opinion, this is one step below a full-on insurrection. This is reminiscent of Columbia 1985, the siege on the Palace of Justice, when guerrillas from a group called M19 attacked the Supreme Court in Bogota, and at the end, almost 100 people were dead. I'm not so naive to think that such an event can't happen in the United States. Things always escalate, especially when they're allowed to, and especially if there are people in positions of authority low-key co-signing it. A few months ago, some right-wing militia dudes got arrested because they were planning to kidnap the governor of Michigan. They were caught because there was an FBI informant in the group, so they were dead to rights. But Sheriff Darleaf in Michigan was making excuses for these dudes. He suggested they just wanted to make a citizen's arrest of the governor. So here is a sheriff downplaying the gravity of people trying to kidnap a sitting governor. And then with these riots in DC, you have the Chicago Police Union president defending them, and you even had politicians partaking in the mayhem. Like this guy here, Derek Evans, a Republican lawmaker from West Virginia. And he wasn't the only one. And if they managed to pull this off, I guarantee you they'd be able to do far worse in the future. As I said, things escalate. And this wasn't the first time federal buildings were invaded. In the last year, they ran up in federal buildings angry about masks and quarantine. And if the feds themselves don't crack down on these far-right groups, you know, the way J. Edgar Hoover did the Black Panthers and other black groups with COINTELPRO, I believe it's only a matter of time before we see them run into federal buildings and start actually taking out politicians. If they can get into Nancy Pelosi's office now, maybe next time they'll get in while she's actually there. And if there are cops with a shared ideology, we don't know which side they'll pick in that situation, which is one of the many reasons I believe here in New York they need to let folks practice their Second Amendment rights, because it is no one's job to protect you but you. And let's just say some militia with a heavy arsenal decides to really take over governmental buildings or carry out attacks on people, then what are you going to do to protect yourself? Rely on police? What if the police are like the Sheriff Darleaf or John Catanzara, the president of the Chicago Police Union? You're on your own in that situation. Anyway, guys, that's all I had to say about that. If you made it this far into the video, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.